After 12 years in the making, Diablo III was finally released back in May. Before launch, it broke a fair few records, becoming the most pre-ordered game of all time on Amazon.com, as well as setting a record for fastest-selling PC game ever, offloading over 3.5 million copies in the first 24 hours of release. But does it live up to the expectations of the previous games in the series, and was it worth the huge anticipation of millions of PC gamers worldwide? Let's take a look. Playing Diablo 3 for the first time, it's quite obvious that Blizzard, the developers, have really made an effort to try to make the game as friendly for newcomers to the franchise as possible. This certainly makes sense considering that in the 12 years since the previous Diablo title came out, a whole new generation of gamers has come about that likely hadn't heard of Diablo until Diablo 3 was being advertised. Given that logic, the first few chapters of the game are very easy, with most enemies taking only 2 or 3 hits before going down. Nevertheless though, the combat is very satisfying, as it should be. While at first it may seem as though there is nothing more to the combat system than repeatedly mashing your mouse button over an enemy until they're destroyed, this quickly changes. Each level up introduces a new skill to keep the fighting fresh. Introduction of new skills is very well paced, and I liked the fact that they didn't use a skill tree type system. You can choose whatever combination of skills you like, and you can deselect skills at any time. You aren't locked into anything. Not only does this serve as a system for keeping the combat fresh and interesting at all times, it also means you can configure different builds for different situations. For example, if you find yourself in an area swarming with lots of smaller enemies, then you have the ability to change from a directional attack to an area of effect attack without any problem at all. Not only are the attacks and skills bestowed upon the player very diverse and interesting, but so are the monsters you'll come across throughout the game. Almost every new area will introduce a new species of hellspawn, and fairly often you'll come across rare monsters which will be equipped with special magic effects, not to mention a much higher damage output and far more health than normal enemies. On higher difficulty levels, these rare creatures can become very challenging indeed, as the harder the difficulty, the more magical effects can be combined within the rares. In fact, this leads to one of few criticisms I have of the game. While the rare monsters you come across are often a challenging and engaging spike in the difficulty of the game, it's not unusual, especially later on, to come across groups of rare enemies that seem ridiculously powerful compared to the standard level monsters. Combinations of effects such as arcane, which means the enemy can produce small turrets blasting a magical laser in a fairly large circumference, and jailing, which locks the player in place, can seem deadly and a little unbalanced, meaning you're likely going to die and have to go back to previous areas in order to grind up a few levels, or find some better gear that'll help you deal with these beasties. While a little grinding's okay, these difficulty walls can be quite frustrating. Luckily though, Blizzard have announced that this issue should be fixed in update 1.0.4, which will increase the difficulty of standard enemies and reduce the difficulty of rare enemies, so decreasing the size of the difficulty gap. That update's coming out at the end of August. The story the game tells is decent. It was certainly enough to engage me for the entirety of my first playthrough, and the pre-rendered cutscenes between acts were stunningly well made. I've seen full-budget computer-animated films that have looked worse, and the voice acting is for the most part pretty solid, and includes a return of Michael Goff voicing the series' staple character Deckard Cain.
Here in the heavens, justice shall fall upon the world of men.
I am ashamed to admit that I hadn't actually played the previous Diablo games, but it does mean I'm able to say that the story, like most other things in the game, were easy to get to grips with for someone new to the series. However, it's not the story that'll just keep on bringing you back for more. Nope, that's the job of the gameplay, and a fine job it does too. Once I finish with this review, I'll most likely be right back in there mashing my mouse button like there's no tomorrow. The game does have multiplayer, which can be played publicly with random strangers and is very easy to initiate. However, I didn't find public multiplayer all that fun. Miscommunication, skills that don't complement each other, some people wanting to skip cutscenes and others not wanting to, it just seemed a little messy. They have made some improvements compared to the previous Diablo games, the main one being that each player gets individual loot drops, meaning no more ninja looting. Regardless, the multiplayer was far more fun when playing with people I knew, and who I could talk to with voice chat. This meant we could coordinate our attacks and choose skills that complement one another's. For instance, one of us could choose a healing skill, while another might forego healing abilities to increase their damage output. On the subject of Diablo 3's online features, I find myself facing another criticism. Two, in fact, although the first is quite subjective. Not long after launch, Blizzard introduced the much-touted Real Money Auction House. With this, players are able to buy and sell items they've found or crafted in the game using real-world money. Personally, I didn't like the sound of this, and didn't take part in any buying or selling of items. I also fear that it could possibly lead to buying power when player versus player is introduced, if indeed it ever is, but considering items all have a level requirement for their being equipped, that is unlikely to be a major problem. However, this auction house, of which there is also one in which in-game gold can be used for trade, is likely the major cause for my second criticism, which is by far the biggest problem I have with the game. As even items found in single player can be sold on the auction house, to avoid hacking in of items, Blizzard have made it so that the game is always online while you're playing it. Even in single player, you're connected to a Blizzard server at all times. Not only does this mean that you need an internet connection to be able to play Diablo 3, which could be very annoying for those playing on a laptop who want to play while travelling, but it also means there is lag. Yes, lag, even in single player. I've died multiple times due to a lag spike. It wasn't my computer freezing up, as things like particle effects and physics were still in motion, but after half a second I'd find myself teleported into the large group of rares I was just kiting. Very annoying indeed. Otherwise though, the game is technically very sound. The graphics are fairly good, not the best, but they serve their purpose and are generally pretty nice to look at. The game runs well too. While I wasn't able to play it on my laptop with its 3-year-old Intel integrated graphics, which is hardly a surprise, my gaming PC with a simple GeForce GTX 460 ran it no problem at all, and rarely dipped below 60 frames a second at full HD and at maximum settings with anti-aliasing turned off. While the game does have its problems, like always needing to be online and the lacking appeal of public multiplayer, its positives easily make up for them, and in my opinion, especially considering the amount of time I could so easily spend playing and enjoying this game, Diablo 3 is something you shouldn't miss out on. Available from Ultimatum Games at ugkeys.com.